Ho ho ho, and welcome back to Let's Dev! It is once again that time of the year where we celebrate the holiday season with our annual Let's Dev Holiday Special. Now, a quick reminder for those of you new to the tradition or just need a reminder, the holiday special comes with a few rules. The first is we'll be building a holiday themed game and it must be done from scratch. The second rule is the process must be recorded so it can be shared with you folk. And the third and final rule is that I only have an accumulated 24 hours to complete the project. That includes code, graphics, sound, and everything else needed to make a video game. Well, a video game. And at the end, if all goes well, I release that game for free as a thank you to you lovely folk for your continued support. So with that said, let's quickly go over the project. This year, we'll be creating a mini survival game I'm calling Survive Elf. The gist is, the player crashes Santa's sleigh and needs to repair it. In order to do so, they must craft replacement parts out of materials found around them using sacred elf magic. More on the lore later, but basically the crafting is done by literally throwing materials at other materials. And of course, players will also have to deal with several survival elements. So today's plan is to build the foundation of our gameplay, primarily the crafting mechanic, where we'll have to build ourselves a system based on the throwing of materials. But before we get to any coding, we'll take a quick look at our visual approach for this year's project. So with that all said, let's get to it. This year we're returning to an old favorite. That's right, we're bringing back the Pseudo 3D for, hopefully, a full project this time. Now, I haven't truly messed with Magical Voxel in a long time, and boy has it come a long way. The editor is much more robust than the version I messed with years ago, so much so that it's allowing me to create what could possibly be the main title screen, a fully rendered scene done in Magical Voxel and loaded into our game via the sprite stack technique, which by the way is now a natively supported export option. So consider this an official update to arguably the most popular video on my channel. It made creating and exporting majority of the art for this game so much easier. To break down the process, I first drew a 2D version of the sprites I intended to model. I went super low res here for aesthetic's sake, and also because I knew this was going to be a huge time sink. I then imported those 2D sprites into Magical Voxel and painstakingly converted them voxel by voxel into 3D models. I then exported them as stacks and imported them into GameMaker to do its magic. And this entire process alone took at least 6 to 8 hours. And you'll see why it took so long in a future episode. For now, I just wanted to share a sneak peek at the art for the game because we'll be working with basic shapes for now while we work on the basic mechanics for our little game. Speaking of which, let's get to the coding. I started by setting our player to point towards the mouse and had it check for the item object, the lifeblood of our crafting system. If the player is near an item that can be picked up, we store it as a variable, else we reset the variable to nothing. Then in the item object, to keep track of which item is targeted, I had it change color. And so far, things were going just as we needed them to. So going back to the item code, I gave it a select variable. This would toggle item behavior. When active, that meant the player is carrying it, and so the item would follow the player's position. I also set up our throw state and added throw related variables for timing and speed to the object. Then in the player code, I set up a check for the action button. When initiated, if the player is empty-handed, we pick up the nearest item. And if the player is already carrying something, we throw that object. This ended up working exactly as we needed it to. The player was able to pick up and throw objects with ease. And speaking of ease, I thought our throw speeds could use some easing instead of stopping immediately. So I clamped our speed variable and had it incrementally slow down at any speed over 0. The results were far more aesthetically pleasing with the object slowing to a halt instead of the original immediate dead stop approach. So with our throwing mechanic now working, we needed to turn it into a crafting system. So I set up a script with arguments for the thrown object ID and the object being thrown at. I then did a directional check to determine the ricochet direction in case the objects don't mesh. I then set both objects' variables relative to each other's positions to create a bounce effect. And there we had it, the default these materials don't mix bounce effect was working, which meant we could move on to the actual crafting portion. First, we need enums, a lot of them. One for each material and item that's part of the crafting system. One very populated list later, we could now go back to our item check script and get to work. I decided to go with a switch within switch approach for each item and each potential crafting match possible. To start, I had wood check for wood. The results would be a single stick, so I destroyed both wood objects and created a new item in its place with the type value for stick. As absurd as this seemed, it absolutely worked the way we needed it to, and thus the beginning of our crafting system was born. Throwing wood, colored yellow, into other wood would produce a stick, colored green. And as a fun side note, I had to use regions for the first time in my GameMaker experience because there was just that much code once I got through the entire list of craftable combos. I mean, look at this. That's over 250 lines of code checking for things like wood on wood, wood on stone, stone on stone, and so forth. Without those regions, it would be a nightmare just to sort through that script alone. Anyway, with that brings us to the end of today's episode of the Let's Dev Holiday Special. With such a huge chunk of our game done, we move on to our next chunk. But that's next time. For now, remember that if you like this video or enjoy Let's Dev in general, be sure to hit that like button. If you aren't already subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button and be sure to turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. And as always, be sure to leave your thoughts on our progress in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.